Hey, it's Aneesh Gera. Welcome to my home in Goa. I'm going to show you a little bit as to how I wrote my record Starchaser.
Welcome to my studio. To commemorate Starchaser crossing 1 million streams on Spotify, the record label Black Hole Recordings and I decided to get together, do a little video deconstructing the whole record, a look into my songwriting approach, and a little insight into what I do. I'm quite methodical with my songwriting approach. I always kind of have a plan before I start a project. I prefer to chase an emotion or a vibe more than anything else when I'm writing a record. So for me, because I was a DJ before I was a producer, I think like a DJ. And what I mean by that is when I write a record, I want to figure out where this would go into a set, which artist would I play before, which artist would I play after, what time in a set this would fit in. And I find that very useful when it comes to songwriting. So right off the bat with Starchaser, I knew what I wanted to chase was a melodic, euphoric record, progressive, but not necessarily a dance floor banger. I wanted to go slow, so I was aiming between 120 and 122 BPM. And once I got the groove down, I realized it sounded really good at 120, and that became the backbone on which I just built the whole record. A question I get asked quite often is, what do I start with when it comes to writing a record? And each project's different, but with Starchaser, I started with my drums, probably because I think drums and percussion is my weakest point, to be honest. Machine Micro is a tool that I use to write all my drums and percussion. Once I got the groove down, I exported everything back into Logic. And if you listen to the drums in Starchaser, it's actually quite housey, not typically progressive, and that was very apparent right in my approach, because I think drums and percussion lend so much of character to a record. And the engineered drums sound like this. As you can tell, quite housey, very chunky, big hi-hats, a lot of shakers going on there. Not very typical progressive house sounding drums, to be fair, but that was very apparent in my approach. I wanted to be a little far left. Pretty organic sounding drums is what I was aiming for. But the most important thing, of course, is making sure that kick drum comes throughout the mix. And I think that adds a huge dynamic to the record when you're playing progressive music. Makes your record stand out a bit more, I find. Moving on to my next layer, which is bass lines. It is plural because I've got 7 different bass lines running throughout the record, but I've used some as a little fill and I've used some in like an effect kind of space. Moving on to the 2 main elements, which is my top layer and my sub, I've just frequency segregated them. So my top layer almost boring sounding, you could argue. The important thing to take away from this is how the bass lines are mixed. So the top layer is mixed exactly the opposite of the sub. I'm a huge fan of Logic's own factory-built EQ. I've taken everything out from 164 Hz at 48 decibels per octave, which is the sharpest curve available to you. The top layer comes in about 200 Hz till about 1K, and then it drifts back off again post 1K at a slow frequency dip. And my sub is mixed exactly the opposite. So I've got everything coming through from about 30 Hz all the way up to about 600, and then it dips back down again. And the 2 layers marry up beautifully. like so. Right, bringing me onto my synthesizers, this is the main part of the record. The loop's at 4 minutes 16 seconds, and it's where the whole track opens out completely. Try to keep it as simple as possible. Just 2 layers, both written in Massive, which is my favorite go-to synth at the minute, another Native Instruments tool. And the lead's really simple. I've layered it with 2 different synths. I've used a default patch called Open Eyes, which is really simple, but of course tweaked it just to make it sound a little bit of my own. And the melody goes a little something like this. C5 all the way down to C2, that's layered. And the second synth is a carbon copy of the same. Put that all together and you're left with this. Right, just to take you through how the leads are engineered. I've got a little bit of EQ on the leads naturally, taken everything out from 200 Hz and below. Got a bit of a boost of 2.5 decibels at 2250 Hz. But at 9K, I've got a pretty sharp cut at 20 decibels. Just so that I can take out the high end and it's not too sharp and shrill for the listener, because I am playing C5 on the octave. A little bit of compression. I'm a huge fan of Logic's built-in compressor. I think they're brilliant. So just a simple 2:1 ratio here, mild sidechaining, nothing out of the ordinary. And one of my favorite plugins is the TBK, or as I always refer to it as my big gold nub. Go figure. And it's a lovely little filter with a great curve on it, so I actually prefer to use this to take out frequencies than actually EQing sometimes. So if you haven't got it, get it, it's brilliant. And you put everything together and you're left with this. That was a little insight into Starchaser and how I wrote the record. Big ups to everyone that supported it. Much love.